Well, this is an exciting morning for me anyway. I think it's just great to be able to talk about parent-child dedication. I think it's just fabulous. As some of you know, I've also, my wife and I have also kind of crossed that other line where we're now grandparents. And there is nothing sweeter than being a grandparent. And I know some of you grandparents would shake your head and say yes. We've been talking about spiritual growth exercises, and I think that it makes sense. It's appropriate for us in the midst of a discussion of spiritual growth exercises. We talked about Sabbath, we talked about prayer, we talked about Bible reading. In the midst of our discussion of spiritual growth exercises, to also segue and talk about how that connects with us as parents and our children and our homes. So I think it makes sense for us to talk about those habits with our families in mind. It's been said that one of the big tasks for parents is to give your children roots and wings. Roots and wings. Roots has to do with the foundation that they build their life on, and wings, you notice that as soon as your little toddler grabs the spoon and doesn't want you to put the spoon in their mouth anymore, they're getting independent. And there's different steps. Suddenly they want to drive the car, and suddenly, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, in Canada, the government says that you're an adult when you turn 18. And I think as parents, part of our job, is to make sure that when they turn 18, when the government says they're an adult, that they actually are. Can you imagine an 18-year-old that still gets the bottle or gets spoon-fed and gets their diaper changed? That would not be normal. Okay, so roots and wings, that's part of our job. And today we're not going to talk as much about wings, but we want to talk about roots. We want to talk about roots. And we want to help our kids to develop good roots. That's part of the process as they grow up. Psalm 127, verse 3-5 says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward." So a heritage, a reward. Wonderful. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. Quiver. Well, my wife and I, we barely replaced ourselves. We had 2 kids. That was intentional on our part because we were on the mission field and we decided that those that were supporting us, we didn't want that burden to be excessive. So we decided personally that we would limit it. Some of you have a marimba. You know what a marimba is? It's a Nicaraguan xylophone. So that's a marimba. You have to maybe be Nicaraguan to catch on to that joke. That's okay. You can move there with me once I retire. In 1 Samuel 1, we have the story of Hannah dedicating Samuel, her first son, to the Lord. And although we're not really expecting you parents that are here with your kids this morning, we're not expecting you to give your child to the church to help with chores. That wasn't part of the deal. I recognize that. And yet, Hannah's expression is a wonderful expression and recognition of the fact that our children actually belong to God in the first place. Now, I realize you think they're yours. Yes, they are. But at the end of the day, they belong to God. They belong to God. And that's also important to recognize. Well, the theme of this entire psalm is dependence on God. Dependence on God and His resulting care for those who depend on Him. What we can do and what we're encouraged to do is to invest in the spiritual growth of our children by raising them up in the Lord. That's an investment. That's an investment. Today we're celebrating this amazing gift of children. And also, as a church family, we are committing ourselves to working together to help you as parents to train up your child in the Lord. And it's been said that it takes a village to raise a child. And this is a family. This is a village, if you will. And we come alongside and we do this with you. Deuteronomy 6, verses 4-9 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. Notice in this passage, the first command is to the parents to love God. That's the first step. If you do everything else and you don't do that, there's no point. The first command is to love God completely, exclusively, and wholeheartedly. In fact, probably the best gift you can give to your kids is to do exactly that. Actually, it has been said, love God and do as you like. Love God and do as you like. Because if you love God, then of course you'll probably behave according to what God wants you to do. This statement here is not really strictly a monotheistic confession, one God. That's not really the intent of this statement. It is much more a cry of allegiance and affirmation of covenant commitment. It's an affirmation of commitment to God. Now, this text that I just read does not really encourage this. Do as I say, but not as I do. You know, one of the most difficult places to be a Christian is in your own home. You can maybe look nice, you can dress up nice. I was told this morning my tie was crooked, it maybe still is. You can dress up nice, you can put on airs, but it's really tough at home because at home they see us the way we really are. It's difficult to have pretense in the home. So it's not do as I say, but not as I do. For teaching to be effective, it also needs to be modeled. It needs to be modeled. It needs to be lived out and demonstrated. And this commitment must permeate all of life. True love for God is rooted in the heart, and true spirituality arises from the heart and extends from there to all of life. So, as parents, I've heard it said, never threaten your kids that if they don't behave, you're going to throw them out the window. Because you have to actually be prepared to carry through on what you said. So unless you're prepared to throw your child through the window, don't make that threat. Now, this isn't a parenting lesson, but you will probably find as your kids grow that they will test those boundaries. And part of that is because they need to know. Security is part of knowing that there are boundaries and where they are. So if you don't kind of manage to build some boundaries, that's going to be really difficult. And don't threaten to throw your kid out the window. Secondly, this covenant commitment to God is also meant to be a family matter. And teaching our children requires repetition for success. Repetition for success. The primary responsibility for teaching children to love God rests on their parents. We can have children's church, you can have the pastor tell a children's story once in a while, you can have Sunday school, etc., etc. Those are all meant to assist, to come alongside, but the primary responsibility still rests on the parents. So, a bedtime story, Bible stories, praying with your kids, family devotions, etc., etc. And by the way, it rarely works to not have any devotions, and then when your kid hits 15 and gets rebellious, to now start family devotions. That's going to go over like a lead balloon. It's better to start that a lot earlier so that it's part of your family practice instead of, oh, now we're going to do something because our kid is rebellious. Notice the verbs here: impress, talk, tie, bind, write. They're all descriptions of formal and informal teaching. Instilling, or what I would call injecting, biblical values. And all of these verbs are imperative. They're commands. They're not merely suggestions. What we're talking about is making sure that the input, the exposure, is greater on the side of biblical values than the input on the side of worldly values. Now, we have another challenge in the Western world that's come up in my lifetime. And I'm not a hair over 20, right? But in my lifetime, we've moved from where mom stayed at home, to where mom and dad both work, and you have this phenomenon called latchkey kids. And kids sometimes come home to an empty house after school. So the instruction in the home has to be that much more intentional because the challenges are just greater. Okay? It's not that it isn't doable, it's going to have to be intentional. Deuteronomy 11:18-21. Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. I know this passage seems to repeat the earlier one in Deuteronomy 6, but there seems to be an added promise. Moses seems to draw a link between faithfulness to God and receiving God's ongoing blessings. Each successive generation must demonstrate faithfulness to God through obedience. Every day is a day of decision. Our commitment to God must not only be renewed at significant times, but on a daily basis. It's a daily thing. Our relationship with Christ is a special relationship that requires constant investment of energy and devotion. And I think Jesus illustrated this in John chapter 15 when he said, "No branch can bear fruit unless it remain in the vine." So today is parent-child dedication. This is not a substitute for infant baptism. The dedication of children has no sacramental value. The fact that you are here, parents, with your children, this doesn't mean that your child now has, that this is like baptism. Rather, this is a parental and congregational expression of prayer and commitment for the child. In fact, unless parents follow through in training their children in the ways of the Lord, this is meaningless. The ceremony itself does not convey grace to the child. In the context of the church family, this commitment, though, is made publicly as the church seeks to support the parents in this process of training up their child in the ways of the Lord. And there's this crazy thing called libre albedrío, free will. Free will. And boy, it would be so nice if I could have given up my free will, or if God would take it away from me the day I became a Christian, because then I'd never sin again. I'd like to wash my hands, see, of responsibility. And some of us would love it if our children wouldn't have free will because they couldn't choose to go astray. See, we love our kids as parents, and we're really concerned about their future, and yet at the end of the day, they have free will and they get to decide. What we can do is make sure that we have good input. We inject biblical values, and we work at it from that end. So today, as a congregation, we want to join you in prayer that your child will grow up in the Lord as a believer and will walk in his steps.